Good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Today is August 24th, 2026, and we are here today for a work session with our Office of Emergency Management regarding federal legislation and local impacts. I'm Larimer County Commissioner Jody Shai McNally. Welcome to our meeting for our work session today in our Commissioners Conference Room at the Larimer County Administrative Services Building. I'm joined at the dais by Commissioner Stevens, our County Manager Lauren DeVolker, and then I will introduce our Director of Emergency Management, Lori Hodges, who will introduce the rest of her team that are here for this presentation. Again, thank you all for coming. We welcome you. And Lori, take it away.
Hello, Lori Hodges, Director of Emergency Management. I'm here with a couple of our team here, so I'll have them introduce themselves. Do you want to start?
Lauren Barnes, I'm a Disaster Finance Specialist. Camille Millard, Preparedness and Resiliency Coordinator.
And Cole Parrott, Deputy Emergency Manager.
All right, so before we start with the legislative update that you guys had requested the last time that we met, we were just notified, like seconds ago, that Cole has been honored as one of the International Association of Emergency Managers 40 under 40. So that just came out today, so congratulations, Cole.
Well, congratulations, Paul. Let's all just give him a... And can you say that group again, International?
It's the International Association of Emergency Managers. It's their 40 under 40 honorees.
And when will that ceremony be?
I don't know. I'm sure that he'll be getting a certificate, and then we're going to the International Association of Emergency Managers conference, and I'm sure there's going to be something at that conference. I don't know if you're going, though, Cole. Are you going to that?
This makes it look.
You are now.
I was going to say, yeah, he's going now. And where is that at and when?
It's in Long Beach, California in November.
Awesome.
Yeah. So Cole was selected by his peers and colleagues across emergency management, recognized for the work that he's done to advance the field. And as you guys know, Cole is kind of like the innovator of our group. He goes off into his hole and and we give him an idea, and a few weeks later he comes out with something brilliant. So he's done that on number of occasions. So this is a well-deserved honor.
It's good because I'm out of ideas. So,
Yeah.
Once you turn 40, it's all downhill.
Very, very well deserved. Lorna, would you like to add anything to that?
I would just say you are the innovator of the group, and I know you make it a lot of fun. So not only do you disappear into your little space, but you come out and interact with your colleagues and peers and the community members, and you're appreciated for a lot of reasons, and it's great to see you recognized nationally like this.
well, thank you.
Congratulations.
Yeah, excited about it.
All right. So the last time that we met, we talked about how there's a lot going on at the federal level with regard to emergency management. Talk about, is FEMA going to go away? Is FEMA going to become a cabinet level position? So I was asked to kind of just bring forward what's the current legislative priorities at the federal level, what bills have come out regarding emergency management, and what's their status. So that's what this handout really is, a quick page. And I also sent this to you guys electronically, so you guys do have it in your inboxes. But I figured we'd just go through a few of these, talk about kind of the likelihood of it happening or not, and then the impacts really to local government. So probably the most consequential bill out of all of these is HR 4669, which is called the FEMA Act. And that one, I think, has the most legs in Congress. It's a bipartisan bill. There's a lot of support for it. And it takes really all of the bills that we're going to talk about, and it takes kind of the best and greatest of all those bills and puts them together. So that bill establishes FEMA as an independent cabinet-level agency, as it was prior to becoming part of the Department of Homeland Security. It reforms the Stafford Act. So some of the recommendations at the National Advisory Council, when I was on it, some of those recommendations are in this act now. So they did take a lot of input from the National Emergency Management Association, from International Association of Emergency Managers, and from the NAC, and they put that into here. So that was really good as well. It seeks to simplify damage assessments and really simplify the process overall. As we've been saying for a long time, the process is just too cumbersome and too hard for folks. And then it expands the state's flexibility and revises mitigation, procurement, accountability, and transparency provisions. So it also establishes FEMA's own inspector general structure, which I really like that because I don't know if you guys remember, but after the flood, the Office of Inspector General would come in and they would disagree with everything that FEMA told us was okay to do. And then there would be kind of this report that would come out and say, Larimer County is deficient in all these ways when we did exactly what another federal entity told us to do. So having their own inspector general, maybe they'll understand the disaster framework better. And so I thought that was a good thing as well. It's unlikely, really, that any of the bills that I'm talking about are probably going to be passed in this Congress, just because many of them have been stalled. But there's a lot of movement, or a lot of, I'll say, a lot of influence with regard to the FEMA Act specifically to get that moving. There's a lot of people and a lot of lobbying that's going on to try to get that moving in Congress. So we'll kind of see what happens there. Any questions about that one, since that's kind of the biggest one of them all?
Commissioner Stevens, you have questions? I have a couple. Go ahead.
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. So with that one, I'm looking and it's saying that increased state responsibility. So will there be more funding asks of the state? I mean, does this cut kind of the normal funding that we're used to seeing?
I think with all of the legislation that's being proposed, there's a shift to more local control, but that also means more local responsibility. And so one of the things that I've heard from the associations is when any of these bills pass, there also has to be a mechanism that says, how do you shift what's currently going to the federal government as far as funding to the states to be able to manage these programs as well. So yes, there would be more responsibility, I think, at the local level, but then also there would be more local control.
So just a follow-up, sorry, because when I went to the Chamber of Commerce LLC meeting, they're like, well, we're still paying our federal taxes, and if we're not getting as much from FEMA as we used to, how are we pushing back on that? What does that look like? And so maybe you could just respond to that, kind of how, and with knowing that the state has no money,
Right.
that, what does that environment look like for us for future emergencies?
That's one of the biggest local impacts. That's one of the biggest fears or challenges I think that we have with all of this is that there's a huge push to say, the federal government's too big. We need to shift the responsibility more local. But the whole reason that FEMA was designed and created in the first place was they understood that these mega disasters can't be handled at a local budget level. So that's why I think that the conversation has shifted also to, yes, these reforms are great, and yes, we can do that, but the funding has to follow. It can't just keep everything at the federal level that we've been paying, and now you have this burden on the locals and the state to manage it. I can't say, though, that that's actually going to happen. But it is part of the conversation, though, the fact that people are saying you can't make these changes without some kind of a process in place for the funding to also shift to the locals.
Well, right, and I mean, if we do need to create our own funding pools, whether it's at the state or local level, we need sort of an on-ramp for being able to do that. Like, we can't just do that on the dime like the federal government can.
Right.
Right, especially given Tabor and some of the restrictions in Colorado. So, all right, it sounds like you guys are watching it. Please let us know how we can advocate, but yeah.
Yeah, we also can't go into a deficit like the federal government, so,
That's right, that's
yeah,
right.
it does make it a lot more difficult.
Thank you.
All right.
I have some questions.
Okay.
First, Lori, you have been a constant voice for changes for the Stafford Act. And I know Congressman Neguse has been very open and listening to those concerns you have. And I know you had a piece of document that you were showing some of those changes in the middle of they handed it out at the town hall we had on mitigation, I think. I'm trying to remember. There's so many of them lately. So my question twofold is, first, are you pleased with some of the changes you see in this act that you've been advocating for? And secondly, do we know who are some big sponsors in the House or the Senate on either side that would give us a little indication if our local representatives or senators are thinking these are some needed changes?
I should know that, but I don't know that. I would assume that Congressman Neguse is part of the FEMA Act, but I don't want to say for certain because I don't know. As far as the first part of that, I do think that out of all this legislation that we're going to talk about, I do like the FEMA Act the most because it really, like I said, it takes what the associations have been saying for a long time. It takes the recommendations from the National Advisory Council, and it puts it into actionable items. The thing is, though, you can write it all down and it can be passed, but it's really the implementation that's going to tell us if it's actually going to make the reforms that we want it to make. Because every time that the Stafford Act, actually, kind of a funny story, the very first time I met with Congressman Nagus, I told him, if you're looking for a bill, I would love to rewrite the Stafford Act. That was my first conversation ever with Congressman Nagus, because it's been patchworked so many times. With every big disaster, somebody learns something and they're like, oh, we need to change this legislation. So now it's just this patchwork of stuff that doesn't really make a lot of sense, and it makes it much more cumbersome on the local level and the state level to try to manage those programs. So this is designed to try to take some of that away and streamline it. But again, it's in how do they implement it and how do they actually make those policy changes at FEMA? And does it end up making everything harder, or does it make it less difficult? You know, that's still, we're going to have to see if that passes, you know.
Yes, and I think that's one of the first conversations you and I also had, other than when we were on a Zoom call about the Cameron Peak fire and all that. And that was right the first time I actually had a pretty in-depth conversation with you. And I know you've been pushing these for a while, and I agree with you that when you patchwork all these, it makes a complex system already extremely complex, especially when, you know, these mega fires and natural disasters are at a all-time intensity. Mega might be, there might be a mega if we keep going this way. But I want to go back to pushing the costs down. I think it's definitely bringing simplifying some of the assessments and administration would be really helpful. And you and I talked about having which I don't know if we're ever going to see that right now, but one place to put in all your assessments and all the things that happen,
right.
and then have them just shoot out to all the different agencies or things you could do. So it'd be simple, especially for smaller counties who aren't as well. We have you all, and you guys have figured a lot of this out through a lot of hard work and innovation, Cole, and focus, because we have experience. Unfortunately, and fortunately, since we're the only county in Colorado, I think I said this on Friday at the ribbon cutting, that we've had more natural disasters than any other county in the state of Colorado. And I think in Larimer County is one of the most, and Colorado has had the most than most states in the whole country. As I understand, the sheriff said at the training center in Texas, we're like right in the middle. And then Larimer County is under Colorado. So we're kind of on the heat map that I'm not so proud of us being number one there. But it gives us a lot of experience. So knowing this and knowing how these expenses, knowing how they've not responded to the Lee fire, the flooding Archuleta and La Plata, the federal government has not declared disasters, and I know there's some things in the news over the weekend. But the cavalry is not coming. The federal government's not showing up with resources. The state government certainly is not showing up, as we know, because they have a $1 billion deficit the last 2 years. So I'm curious, do you see any kind of advocacy at that level or with your association or your task force saying, really pushing that local governments cannot absorb these costs? They cannot, they need, as you've told me and what you've taught me is recovery starts day one of the disaster. We have to start writing checks and start recovery right then. So my question is there anyone advocating besides you and your team? How are we advocating to really make folks understand we can't just let local governments try to slowly take decades to recover. We need to have that money now so that we can get reimbursed and recover quickly for the communities.
Yeah, I think that first, a couple of these bills are trying to do that. They're trying to make the process quicker so that the money does get out to folks, that there's more money available for mitigation during the rebuilding process. I think that that's all good. But also, and also there are associations, like I mentioned, that are really advocating for the local government and the tribal, territorial, because they don't have the budgets really to handle these mega disasters or massive disasters that we're seeing. So there is a lot of lobbying out there. The problem is everything seems to be stalled in this Congress. So it's unlikely that any of the bills that we're going to be talking about are going to be passed in this Congress. However, there's enough legs with a couple of them that they'll hopefully carry over into the next Congress and hopefully move forward. You did mention the declarations at the state level. I did want to talk about that as well. I spoke to Trevor Denny. He's the director for the Office of Emergency Management at the state level. And, one of our big worries too is politics is always part of disaster. It's always going to be part of disaster. So because some of these thresholds are subjective in some fashion, there's always going to be some of that where you have to have the right amount of lobbying or support at the federal level to try to get these declarations across the line. And so in 2025, we had a series of fires here in Colorado that met the public assistance thresholds by a large margin. There was no doubt that they met the thresholds, but those declarations were denied at the federal level, and then they appealed them, and that appeal was denied. And there's no further recourse after that first appeal. This year, the fires that we had at the beginning of June were all considered one incident, which doesn't typically happen. But because the National Weather Service had designated it as a particularly dangerous situation at the time, all those fires that started that 1 week were lumped together, and they did meet the thresholds as well. So they're going to be sending up a letter, I think, today about those fires. So it's a little bit too early to tell whether those fires are going to get that declaration this time around. So that is another worry that we have, is that if politics is at play, are we going to be denied disaster declarations because of a reason other than we met the thresholds? And so we'll just keep doing what we're doing, but I do think that there's enough in the association's lobbying to ensure that we don't have those kind of decisions happening on the ground. So hopefully that helps a little
Yeah,
bit.
that helps a lot. And I think that's what's probably what was in the news over the weekend was, okay, thank you.
Okay, so the other legislation I'll go through kind of quickly, but you have it all in front of you. So the Senate Bill 861, Disaster Assistance Simplification Act. This is much further along legislatively. The Senate passed it by unanimous consent in December of 2025. It's currently sitting in the House. And the core concept is something that we've been talking about for years, which is stop making survivors have to fill out the same forms and do the same work for multiple different federal programs. So the Small Business Administration, FEMA, all of those, they have to do completely separate processes for each of those. And so this would simplify that by creating kind of like that one and done intake process. So I don't see why anybody would be against that. And I don't think it would have a huge, fiscal burden either. But it would be, it could mean that you could move that disaster assistance closer to kind of that all-in-one model instead of survivors navigating a bunch of different programs. HR 403, Preventing Our Next Natural Disaster Act. This is really regarding pre-disaster mitigation and the BRIC program. So one of its major provisions would increase the amount that could be set aside from the disaster relief fund for BRIC from 6% to 15%. It also modifies how mitigation funding would be targeted towards high-risk communities. And I don't know which model they're using to determine high-risk communities. There's a couple of different models there. It also provides a 90% federal cost share for BRIC grants to environmental justice communities and increases the maximum number of people in small impoverished communities. And then authorizes FEMA to develop guidance regarding how to incorporate climate change into the National Risk Index and benefit cost analyses. So it's really, it's mitigation focused, which is great. The BRIC program is very popular because it's a big infrastructure program. BRIC was killed earlier this year, I think it was, or was it last year? And then it came back, it resurrected. So, this one's interesting because there is a lot of talk about BRIC. This was referred to the House Transportation Infrastructure Subcommittee in January 2025, and it hasn't moved since then. So I'm not certain really if that's going to move. So there's that one. HR 1105, Disaster Resiliency and Coverage Act. This bill establishes an individual household disaster mitigation program under the Stafford Act. So rather than just focusing on community infrastructure, FEMA looks at providing grants to states and tribes for mitigation measures on individual properties, kind of like we do here in the county, where we focus on those individual properties and how they can mitigate for disaster. This again was introduced in February of 2025. It was referred to the House Committee on Ways and Means and the Committee on Transportation Infrastructure, but it has not advanced from there either.
May I pause you right there? So when I hear you saying determining which areas are highest need or what need for mitigation, what I hear is they're determining the level of mitigation and being on the Environment, Energy, and Land Use Steering Committee for NACO, the National Association of Counties, we always get a lot of resolutions for southern states who have a lot of hurricanes and soil erosion, and they seem to dominate the conversation. That's so different than the western states who are looking at flash flooding and wildfire. So I'm curious about how who will be making those recommendations about which is highest need or highest need for mitigation or levels of that. I'm wondering about what that might look like. That sounds getting a little complicated to me.
Yeah, if that bill passes, which it's been stalled for a couple of years now, but if it passes, again, it's in the details of how they implement it, and that will be one of our primary focuses. We've always had FEMA policy really directed towards the hurricane states because those are the big, most expensive disasters. But the good news about having all these fires is that it's really bringing a lot of attention to the federal government that wildfire is a major risk and a major danger to the entire West. And so it's bringing the conversation forward a little bit more, which is great. But we will have to advocate if that bill passed or any other bill that has this, we need to advocate on behalf of the Western states. Flooding is a risk for every state. It's the number one hazard in the United States. So flooding does get a lot of attention. But again, is it coastal flooding? Is it riverine flooding, the flash flooding that we have from fires? We need to make sure that they're paying attention to our terrain. That's one of the things with the Cameron Peak fire, we ended up going to arbitration because they just didn't get our terrain. And so by showing the judges, here's what you're looking at when you're looking at post-fire flooding and you're looking at the risk that we have, they understood it, but we have to have those conversations. So I'm glad you mentioned that, but it's something that we're constantly worried about.
I'm constantly worried about it too, because we have these conversations in that steering committee, especially when we're in Washington, D.C. for 8 hours in one day for a meeting and trying to get them all to understand, a coastal southern state has way different mitigation needs
Right.
than western states. And I'll never forget being in that meeting and having North Carolina saying, we have hazard trees and we have all this down stuff. They say we have increased fuel load for wildfires. We don't even know what to do. And I'm like, I do. Let's talk, know. And so, but they've never had that before. So it might be changing, but with the drought and stuff, but still, it's, I think it's whoever's voice is the loudest for either soil erosion or hurricanes or wildfire is going to be, I think, who's going to get the most support. So
Yeah.
but I guess it's time to get louder. So
And that's that subjective part of disaster declarations is painting the picture of the economic loss and the loss to the community overall. If you can really do that in a good manner, then you can show them this is no less important than something that's happening in a coastal community, Both disasters are horrible, but they're just different. And the way that we treat them has to be different as well.
And I'm not saying they're not horrible. They're awful and horrible and lots of life and loss of life and homes and destruction. But I just want to make sure our western states get the same amount of attention. So thanks. I guess we'll proceed.
So one thing I didn't mention is I've been appointed as the International Association of Emergency Managers Government Affairs Committee Lead for Region 8. So now I can speak on behalf of the Western states, because that's what Region 8 is, with regard to some of these issues. So that's, hopefully that'll be a good thing too. All right, so the next one was Senate Bill 336 and House Resolution 1849, Disaster Mitigation and Tax Parity Act of 2025. This one is narrower, but it could have practical consequences for mitigation programs. It would generally prevent state or local catastrophe mitigation grants received by homeowners from being treated as taxable federal income when the money is used for qualifying disasters like fires or floods or whatever else. And this will become increasingly important as states develop programs for home hardening, wildfire mitigation, and flood proofing like we're doing here in Colorado and in Larimer County. The bill was introduced in the Senate on January 30th, 2025, and again remains pending in the Senate Committee on Finance. The next one, House Resolution 5648, Disaster Relief Continuity Act. This would provide appropriations so FEMA could continue major disaster and emergency operations during the 2026 government shutdown, including IA life safety activities. The bill was introduced September of 2025, and then it has not received a vote either. So I don't know if that one's just dead in the water. House Resolution 5794, FEMA Operations Continuity Act. It takes a related approach by explicitly authorizing FEMA to continue DRF-funded response, recovery, and mitigation operations during an appropriations lapse, including the Stafford Act. So it's much like House Resolution 5648. It was introduced in the House October 21st, 2025. It remains in the introduction stage and when was referred to the House Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management. So those are kind of stalled as well. Let's see. So the last one that I want to talk about is the one I least like out of all of them, and I don't know that it has enough teeth to move forward. But House Resolution 3347, this one would actually abolish FEMA within 2 years of it passing, and it would transfer the functions to the president as part of a state-centered disaster system. So this is the bill that would create, I think, the most local impact, where FEMA doesn't exist anymore. I don't know that they would create another federal agency. I think that they would move a lot of the disaster programs to the state and local levels. And so if this was enacted, it would be a substantial change for all of us. And it goes against all of the lessons that we've learned for 50 plus years since FEMA started of the reason why FEMA exists in the first place. So with all of these bills, the themes that have developed from these bills, there's 3 themes. One is decentralization, so moving more from the federal government to states and locals. And again, that's not a bad thing if it's done well, right? And the funding comes along with it. Simplification, which is great. You know, you simplify these programs. Everybody complains all the time that FEMA programs are just too complex, whether it's the individual assistance where individuals have to try to manage that program, or even at the county government, we have to hire contractors just to move through public assistance because it's so complicated. So that would be really good. And then mitigation versus response. So there's a bigger focus now on let's stop just responding to these disasters and let's put more money towards keeping those disasters from happening in the first place, which I think is an excellent move in the right direction. And there's debate about it, about where federal funding should go regarding pre-disaster mitigation. But as you see in these bills, you have more of that focus on let's try to create systems that reduce the impact or eliminate it. So those are kind of the big ones. Like I said, the FEMA Act is probably the one to most watch, and it has the most support, bipartisan support, as well as lobbying from the associations in the emergency management space. So that's the current legislation. As you can also see, most of it's all stalled. So I do hope to see when the new Congress comes in, them pick up some of these bills or pick up some of the themes of the bills and run with them. We'll have to see in the new year.
Thank you. Commissioner Stevens, I see your hand is raised, and I have a couple of questions too, Lori.
Thank you. Thanks, Lori. So one of the questions that I have is the one that seems pretty disturbing is the sort of abolishing FEMA and just going to a block grant concept, because, I mean, block grant concepts are, I mean, we have them for highways, and if they're going to use the same model, like for transportation funding, the funding still goes to the East Coast way more than it goes to any Western states. So, like that in itself is kind of disturbing. Do you feel like a bill like that has any bipartisan support, or is that kind of being pushed by one party?
I don't know if it's being pushed by one party or another. I know that it was introduced by one party, and I don't think it has bipartisan support as it stands. So I don't really think it has enough legs to move forward, especially with the amount of disasters that we're having every year. It just doesn't seem like it would make sense. But again, I'm not in Congress, so I don't know. But I would think that this one probably has the least chance of moving forward. The rest of them are all kind of in alignment, you know?
Yeah.
Simplify, figure things out, make it easier to move this money, and also less costly. If you decrease the administrative burden, it's also less costly to administer these programs. But this one is the scariest out of all of them, I think. And it's the one I think that the president supports, or supported early on. I don't know if he still supports this as well.
Yeah, well, certainly it looks like it's stalled.
Yeah.
And like you said, nothing's going to happen. Is FEMA part of the continuing resolution discussions? Is that part of that funding bill that will likely get passed? Because we feel like most of these, like a lot of funding bills aren't getting passed, and so and won't make it through. So there apparently there's some continuing resolutions. Is
The Department of
FEMA?
Homeland Security as a whole is part of those conversations. Yeah.
And then my last question, well, maybe my last question. Well, first of all, I'd love to see a bill that takes politics out of the decision
I
making.
would love that too.
That just if you qualify for a threshold, then you get the funding. That's a fair way to do things, and I know you all agree, but that would be a nice bill to see, because you can have as many bills as you want, but if there's politics in the mix, you don't know when you're getting funding, right? And that's almost the scariest thing over any of these kind of situations.
So to that point, there's kind of a pro and a con there. So I agree that it would be much easier if we had a set of thresholds where if you met them, it's an automatic, you got the declaration, right? The problem then is who sets those, and is it set from that coastal model? Or is it set from looking across the landscape, the types of disasters that we have, and do different disasters have different types of thresholds? So the good thing about the subjectivity in some of this is you can paint a picture to people who don't understand where we come from and what the disaster might do. So there is that room to be able to be adaptable, to say, hey, but we're different, and this is why this is so costly. So I think with public assistance, there is a threshold, and right now, if you meet that threshold, you should just go forth, and we've used those thresholds for a long time. But it has also been seen that states that have a lot more political power can move that declaration faster. We've seen that as well. The individual assistance program is really subjective. There's not really a threshold. Like it used to be, we used to count on 100 homes or more, you could probably get an individual assistance. That is not at all true anymore. It's, how many, there's just too many variables that FEMA looks at. So you have to really, it's all about the narrative that you paint. So if you're not good at the narrative, you don't get a declaration. Well, that's not fair to your people either. So I guess I see kind of both sides of, we want a framework, we want thresholds, and we want them to follow what the policy says. And we want them to be able to look at the landscape of the United States and see that every community is a little bit different. So how do you build that into it too? It's a very difficult thing,
Yeah, it's definitely complex. And the only other thing I was thinking about, mitigation versus response, obviously really good to start doing the work. And for us, that looks a lot different than these sort of coastal cities that have flooding and hurricanes. But man, we can't keep building in the same spaces and expecting like different outcomes. And I know that there's a lot of disasters in which they're just building on the same land and the same kind of housing. And so like it would be nice to see some support of like, yeah, you can't build that same house.
Right.
And I mean, because I do understand that there's a limited amount of dollars, right? I think that that's something we all need to say. There's a limited amount of dollars to address these things. So bad policy and bad planning, shouldn't be rewarded.
Right. New Orleans has been rebuilt 5 times.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. A good example. Houston has a lot of bad examples of how they're just building the same thing. And I know there's some talk about like sort of this managed retreat of like, yeah, well, you're going to have to like build a little further away from the ocean. I don't know.
Well, we did that with the floods here in Larimer County. If you had land where you could build back off of the floodway, you could rebuild. But if you're in the floodway and your house is destroyed, does it make sense to rebuild that house where it's going to most likely be destroyed again? Because we have a very high history of flooding here. And I think that we do have a strict floodplain code, but there's a reason for that. We've had over 145 deaths, in the county because of flooding. So looking at that and seeing where we can make those changes is good. So I think also at the coastal communities, you got to have that conversation of at what point does it make sense to rebuild,
Great. Well, thanks for keeping an eye on all this stuff. It's really, really important for us to sort of, I don't know that we're in an advocating space because there's nothing going through, but it's good to think about with the next Congress of what might have legs to move forward. And kind of, as you said, the FEMA bill seems like the one that we need to pay the most attention to. So we will continue to do that and make sure that we advocate in the way that you need us to.
Yeah. And working with our legislators now, so the next Congress, if they come back, then they can know what our needs are. Yeah.
Thanks, Commissioner Stevens. So, Lori, I know a lot of these are stalled, but, and you're looking at the next congressional session for this one. You don't see it having a path because it still hasn't got another vote in the full House yet.
Correct.
And I know that because I passed the bill through Congress back in 2020. And I know when they, when they're going to move.
Yeah.
And then it got through the Senate and almost procedural thing almost stopped it from getting passed because of parliamentarian, and then they brought it back. So I know some things where we can watch with that. My question on top of that is, I figured you probably have some people who are watching if it gets moved, and so I'm not sure who can help, rattle some cages on the other side just to kind of get it up for a vote. But I'm curious, we know, which I've been preaching for the last 5 years, that for every dollar invested, I think we started at 6, now it's up to 7, and even the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has done a study saying every dollar invested in mitigation saves $13 in suppression and loss of business and loss of economic development. That all adds up to $13. It's a great investment for all the mitigation we're going to do. And then I've been preaching the last 3 years, there's a cost of doing nothing. Because if we don't increase our mitigation programs and try to get ahead of this and lessen the severity of these fires, we can't take fire off the landscape. It's part of the natural ecosystem. It's important. But making sure that we lessen severity and keep our soil health from being sterilized and the hydrophobic soils and on and on and on. There's a cost of doing nothing. And that study from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce talks about it's $33. And that study came out last year. And so we know that insurance and even the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and business are paying attention to this. Is there any hope that we can partner with some of businesses or chambers? Because Commissioner Stevens had mentioned the chamber, but maybe they haven't read that study yet, that this is really important because we know it saves money in the long run to be more proactive and literally more upstream for our water and other landscapes. What are your thoughts on that? Is any business speaking up to this importance of this act and getting things moving?
Yeah, I'll pass this to Josh in a second if he has any thoughts on this as well, since he does our mitigation work for the office. I'm not sure if the businesses are speaking up on this behalf. I think the difficulty we're always going to have is it's hard to spend money now on something that people think could happen. Here in Larimer, we've had enough of it happening to where people do understand it's going to happen here. That doesn't happen everywhere. In some places, they've never had the big fire, and now they're facing that this year, and we're seeing how they're developing programs kind of on the fly in the disaster itself. So trying to get people to understand the value of mitigation and how it can save that money for businesses, the economy, and everything else. It is a difficult conversation, but I think we still need to have it all the time and talk about what really what does that $13 mean? What does it mean to them specifically, to these businesses, to small businesses that don't recover? There's another FEMA stat, I think it's 25% of businesses don't recover after a disaster, of small businesses. That's a huge deal. So those kinds of stats I think are important. But I think we just have to keep having the conversation. I don't know if Josh has anything he wants to add.
Josh, introduce yourself, please.
Josh Roberts, Mitigation Coordinator. Of course, I've always got something to add on this particular topic. Right, and to an extent, if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there to listen to it, does it make a sound, right? I mean, to an extent, it's some of that. However, of course, there's hundreds of pages of papers and peer-reviewed, scientifically responsible, knowledge that's been created that, of course, it does make a difference, not just from, as you mentioned, Commissioner, an economic sense, but, also that moral and ethical obligation that government has to protect those that it governs, from a life safety standpoint as well. And Commissioner Stevens, I think, you're spot on. It's a, thinking of it in a way as a managed retreat, as the smart, wise, in my opinion, personal and professional opinion, way to go about it. Because there's still some acute needs, right? And so like response capacities need to be improved. Like we need to invest in those things, even, in wildfire context, in suppression things. It just can't be done at the detriment of not doing that sound business, long-term sort of thinking. So it's a both, immediate, near-term, mid-term, and long-term, sort of lens that we've got to be looking on this problem. And historically, most of the way we've looked at it has been in that immediate, near term. But that's shifting. And Commissioner, Shattuck, now that you're spot on, it's we're borrowing time from our children, in a sense. And so we have to, keep that at the forefront of the minds too. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate all of that. And yes, we are. We know some of that Cameron Peak burn area. I'll never see trees grow. I've been planting hundreds of trees up there with Coalition for Poudre Watershed, but I'll probably never see them get up to my hip even. So yeah, it's kind of the unfortunate truth. So we need to have to look at that. All right, Lori, what's next?
I was trying to find, I know it's in here somewhere, but one of these bills puts more money towards. I could. One of these bills, I was trying to find it, but I can't find it. But one of these bills puts more money to that community planning and capacity building, which I think is really important for, if you're a community that just faced a disaster, it's very difficult to look at how do we build our community different, and you take the time to do that when you really just want to get people back in their homes and there's that political pressure. But that community planning and capacity building really makes them look at, this is what Greensboro, Kansas did. You know, they had that tornado that completely destroyed the town, and they decided we're going to have a different town. And they took the time, and now they're a green community. Hopefully, they still are a green community. But doing it during a disaster is really difficult. So having those conversations pre-disaster, where you could say, what does it look like the managed retreat, concept? If this happens, this is what we're going to do. I think that's the best way around it, because then you already have the policy in place, and then you just have to implement it. And then don't let political pressure, which is always hard, change that policy in the heat of the time, because we had that after the 2013 flood. People were coming to us saying, we want to rebuild, and we had to stand firm and say it really makes no sense in the floodway to have homes, because they will be destroyed again in the future. The only other thing that I had for today is I was going to open it up to the group in case they had any updates. I know Camille had a couple of updates about some activities that have been going on, but Camille's also going to be presenting to you guys in a couple weeks at an Admin Matters session with regard to Emergency Preparedness Month, which is the national effort in September of every year. So we'll save that stuff for September 8th. But Camille, you had a couple other things?
Yeah, I just wanted to update everyone how Hero Fest went this weekend. So Hero Fest is our annual partnership with Canvas Credit Union. Ricardo Perez and myself organize that each year, along with Loveland LFRA and the city of Fort Collins. And it was an amazing turnout. A lot of family. It's a very kid-oriented group, but also a lot of new stuff happened this year. Ricardo is out on paternity leave, but I just wanted to make sure he got his kudos too. He spent a lot of time this year organizing a bunch of sheriff versus fire soccer games. And so we had a lot of that happen on Saturday, and it was a beautiful turnout. A lot of families came out, and a lot of new partnerships came through that. So a very successful Hero Fest this year. Again, just thank you to all of our first responders that do the work that they do. But looking forward to that going on each year. Normally it happens a little closer to National Preparedness Month in September, but Kimco, also the organization that runs all of those businesses over there, has been a fantastic partner with us going forward each year. So yeah, just an amazing event, a lot of great turnout, a lot of new partners, and I think fire kind of won almost every game. So, but yeah, Ricardo was out there emceeing it, and so I just wanted to make sure. I know he would have said something if he was here today, so I wanted to make sure that was spoken about. But also, see y'all September 8th. You'll hear all of the wonderful stuff we have planned for National Preparedness Month. So just holding on to that for today to speak about it later. So,
Mr. 40 under 40, do you have anything you want to say?
Yes. The only thing I'll say is kind of to that same theme of National Preparedness Month. We as a county have been doing a lot of preparedness, not just our office, but county departments and offices. As you guys are aware, we did the COOP policy earlier in the year, which requires everybody to submit a COOP or a continuity of operations plan, department, or what is it called? A group page, which is just their information, at least annually. So there was a lot of folks that either didn't have it or were really behind, and some that did keep up, but the policy wasn't formalized, which it is now. So it's been really cool to work with all these different offices and departments and divisions, just as we're kind of getting everyone in compliance with the policy. So everyone is obviously taking time to update their continuity of operations plan, which includes a lot of preparedness. What they have, who they have, where they're going to go. All those kind of things are a topic of discussion. So a lot of preparedness going on, and we should be kind of all set to be in compliance. This year is all about getting everyone in there and having their first one ready. So that way the next few years are just easy. They can open those documents up, they can look at them, make sure all the information is still current, and then update it as needed. And hopefully we can also start doing exercises with individual offices, departments based on those continuity of operations plans as well, so they can exercise the plan they're putting in place. So not just, of course, like the preparedness that we're talking about in our community and in our office with our partner agencies, but also a lot of stuff happening in our organization at the county level too, just with these COOP plans. So it's been cool, and yeah, that's probably the only thing I'll share for you guys.
All right, Josh, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, sure. Mitigation programs, related service delivery, it's going strong, gaining a tremendous amount of steam, in our communities. The community mitigation grant projects that you guys have, graciously funded this year, they're going great. Touch base with everyone, and I love seeing the emails and the pictures and some of the excitement come in from some of those residents and neighborhood leaders about the work that they're doing. They're really getting a sense of agency in the work, which is tremendously important in so many different ways. We just finished up our pilot curbside / removal little event in Crystal Lakes this past week. I'm hearing some great feedback, to that. And Brad, who's with our office, not here with us today, he's done a great job, on that stuff. It was really him that took those reins there. We're going to soon start. Sawdust will begin flying in our HIZ mitigation assistance program that is funded through our CWDG Red Feather Lakes Area Wildfire Defense Project. That's going to begin soon within the next few weeks, so it's really exciting to see. And partners at Larimer County Conservation Corps helping us administer that program, doing a great job with it. It's just great to hear about the stories and some of the feedback there. Also, thanks to y'all's consideration for the recent executing signature on our CWDG Gateway, Protecting the Gateway to the Rockies grant, working through some draft agreements with partner agencies, really get that started in earnest at the moment. So super exciting time for that Southern Larimer landscape. So yeah, just a lot of great stuff happening. Our hazard mitigation plan update project, we're feeling it's kind of being finalized at the moment so that we can send that to the state and federal partners for their review. So we're feeling decent, about where we might be on that project. So yeah, I'll stop there. I could talk for a whole morning, but lots of good stuff going, and in part thanks to you guys. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. That was one document I was really proud and excited to sign as chair. So thank you for that. All right, Lori, what else do you have for us?
One last thing I was going to talk about, I don't know if Lauren had anything specifically, but specific to finance. Sorry. Specific to finance, we had about $3 million-ish still in the disaster fund, which is a fund that is specific to disasters of the past, not disasters for the future. And because of some revenue that's come in and because of some of these projects closing out, we were able to return to the county budget. Trying to find the amount. Do you know the amount off the top of your head? It was a couple $1 million to fund to the contingency fund. I think, I don't know where it went, but back to the budget for other needs. So that was good. And also, it's kind of nice to see that Fund 105 is shrinking down to just a couple of last things. For the 2013 flood, we just have one project worksheet where we have some revenue coming in, and then that's it for that. And then our other projects have closed except for the Alexander Mountain Fire, which is still being processed at the state level. So that's been really good to see as well. So that's all that I have, unless you guys have any questions about other topics on your mind.
Commissioner Stevens, any closing comments or questions?
I just, because you brought up the 2013, maybe we can remind folks, I mean, when we do get money back from FEMA, we often wait decades
Yes.
for that funding. So even in the best of situations where there's no funding cuts, we're sometimes waiting decades to be reimbursed for tens of millions of dollars. So can you just kind of talk maybe just a little bit about kind of why that is, and what, if any of these bills sort of address any of that kind of piece? Because, I mean, it means that we locally have to have a lot of dollars in place to be able to take care of things right away, and then hope that somebody will reimburse us.
Right. Yeah, there are a few bills about streamlining process, and that's what that's all about. If you streamline the process and you decrease the administrative costs, obviously that would also streamline how fast we could get federal dollars back. There's a couple of bills too that change the structure of how the funding happens, where maybe it's, you tell us what the project is, what the cost is, we'll pay you for that cost, and then we're done. I love that. But you always have the cost overruns and all that in the meantime. But I spoke to another state director in emergency management. This was a year or so ago, and she had told me that the administration of the disaster was more costly than the disaster itself. And that to me is a huge problem when you're talking about public dollars. If it's costing that much just to get through the process, there's a strong need for that streamlining. So we do see some bills about streamlining, but again, it's in the, once it gets passed, what does it really mean and how do they develop it into policy? That's where I start really looking at it once the bill actually passes. How do they implement it at the policy level to make it easier for everybody?
Great. Well, just thank you all for the work that you do. Appreciate the updates on the federal landscape, which is clearly unpredictable at best and maddeningly confusing at the worst. And so there again, we're happy to be support in that space for us, for you all. Commissioner Shattuck McNally mentioned that she's on a NACO board and I'm on the resiliency board, as you know. And so this is something that we can try to influence some of these bills, certainly. But I think that the message to our community is we're not sort of waiting for the federal government to do this. I mean, you're doing the work. We're trying to allocate dollars for this work, especially the mitigation work, because we know it does make a difference. So, we will take the money we can get from the state, but know that that's also limited as well. So just appreciate the innovation that you all do, including our award winner. But you're all innovative, right? You're all trying to figure this out with sort of a limited pool of resources, how to really make our community safe and strong and resilient. So appreciate the work.
Thank you. And I will say Larimer County, I do think, is well ahead of most counties, where not only do we have a contingency fund for the next disaster, but we set aside funding for the disasters that we have to ensure that we can manage them appropriately. You guys give our office the flexibility to move that money as we need to get more mitigation money in, to leverage other federal programs. Just having that adaptability really allows us to leverage the money in a way to where we can get the most out of state and federal funding and the least amount of cost to the community members. So I think that's great. And then the mitigation program too, a lot of communities don't have a mitigation program like we do here. So I do want to, thank the commissioners for the support they've given, because you guys have shown you understand the problems that we're facing and you understand that there is a cost associated with that. And I know that you have a lot of competing interests for things that are needed. So that's really appreciated.
So I'm also on the Resilient Counties Advisory Board, and also just got vice chair of the Water Committee for the Environment, Energy, and Land Use Steering Committee, which is looking at mitigation and watersheds. So I just wanted to share that. So, and being on the Rural Action Caucus and Midsize, it's keeping me active in those areas because, of course, a lot of smaller counties don't have resources. But I wanted to just say, even though we know that we have some mitigations, $50,000, which doesn't go very far. And I know we have the two defense grants, but for $450 million that was 2 years ago identified just for a small sliver priority ribbon in Larimer County, those are drops in the bucket for the mitigation and the work we need to do in dealing with the woody body mass, which is the slash in the trees.
That's huge.
We cannot no longer live this on the landscape to just burn in piles. We can't burn piles anymore. It is dangerous. And it is not conditions.
There's too many piles.
There's too many piles.
Yeah.
I think at one time there was over 100,000 piles around Larimer County.
Yeah. We burned a lot of them in our fires.
Right, burned a lot of them. But I hike through. I'm at over 150 miles so far in Rocky this year, and I hike through a lot of forest where there's piles still, and so it costs. There is a cost to doing nothing, and there is a cost to doing something, and there will be a lot more proactive measures and less devastation if we can bring those fuels and manage that load. And so I think that's the importance of that. And so we know that this is more than just 10 million or 50,000. And yes, whatever we can scrape out, I just want to make sure that if people know this mitigation fund is only 50,000.
Yeah.
And we have
It's a start.
It's a start. And I think we've had over $300,000 in asks every year. Just to show.
It grows every year.
It grows every year. I'm sure
Yeah.
it's up even more this year. And knowing that as I understand, we will not have any active mills by the end of the year in the state of Colorado. There is nowhere to take this product. So I just want to highlight that we have this issue with woody biomass, which is the trees and the slash and the branches and all that we have to get off the landscape. That comes at a cost. And so we have to do something. And this is also for the safety of our staff and our first responders and our firefighters, because they are going into dangerous conditions with that fuel load. And I want to make sure when we talk about the Hero Fest, I was actually up camping and hiking like 10.5 miles on Saturday. Sorry, was my day off, tried to get some miles in. And I think that knowing how important that is to give them safer conditions to battle these blazes is really critically important. So I just wanted to highlight that it's really important that we understand the complexities of this and how much it is so prudent and actually proactive, and it's just so much smarter to get ahead of this and be proactive with our mitigation and our work. So I just want to thank you all, because I know you are at the forefront of that, which we're very fortunate, but that does not mean we are even close to where we need to be.
Right.
We have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
To get the scale and scope of what we need it to do. So I wanted to emphasize that. We're very fortunate to have each and every single one of you, especially someone who's getting an award for 40 under 40. I'm going to rub that one in for a while. I love that. Under 40 there, huh, Cole? So I guess, just
For a little while longer.
yeah, just teasing. No, congratulations. We're really super proud. And Lori, thanks for being on this Region 8 lead for the International.
I'm the Government Affairs Committee lead for Region 8 for the International Association
Yeah.
of Emergency Management.
You're going to have
It's a
to
really
send-
long title.
Can you just email that title to me so I get that correct?
Sure.
And
Just
so
call
I
it
just
the
want to
GAC.
say congratulations and thanks for your work on that as well.
Thank you. Well,
Important.
can I say two last things
Yep.
then? To kind of round it all out, if there's any action that can be taken, there's two things that can be done right now while we're waiting for federal legislation. One is what you were just talking about with regard to kind of the marriage of response and mitigation. We cannot forsake mitigation for response all the time. Obviously, we have to respond when disasters occur, but the more we can put towards mitigation, the less these become catastrophic. Also, we've done a ton of studies, and we have the data that shows what we can do if we have the funding to do it, like the woody biomass. There's all kinds of great ideas about how to create a circular economy and all of that. So that's one thing. The other thing is, with regard to the declarations, that's the thing that we should be talking to our legislators with right now. The fact that if we meet the thresholds, one, that they're talking about increasing those thresholds, but also if we meet those thresholds, why aren't those declarations being approved? Even if they're not for our county, it's important for us to advocate for that, because it means that the entire thing is arbitrary if we don't start looking at what those thresholds mean for us. So those are two actions I think that can be taken right away in this space while we're waiting on the federal government with regard to the other bills.
Thank you. Lorinda, I'm going to let you wrap it up, and we have another meeting here in a couple minutes, so.
We do. Thank you so much. I guess I will say to the listening public, if nothing else, this group is good at planning. They're good at collaborating. There are things in place that can be implemented if funding is available. It's too big right now, and there's not one agency in charge. And so they build relationships and partnerships across the region, not just inside our county, but with the state and the region. And they are good stewards of the county's dollars. The idea that we underspent in a disaster meant that they really went after those federal and state dollars to make sure we didn't pay any more locally than we needed to. At the same time, the commissioners have been really responsible in saving for disasters, but we saved for a disaster in a plan where FEMA came under certain conditions and was able to help us rebuild. And it did take us over a decade to get reimbursed for the 2013 flood. So we front the money, FEMA reimburses us, and they argue a lot along the way about what was reasonable, which is probably not a bad thing, but it does make it take a long time. And so two disasters back to back can really undermine a community. And that's the work you all do every day to try to get ahead of that so that we're not just waiting on the response. We really are working with neighborhoods and community associations to get the things out of their forest, to make the conditions safer for them. Perhaps they'll be able to get insurance. And to make it safer for our firefighters who go out and help recover from those. So thank you for all you do. I know we say this every time, but you are a small team that is a force multiplier out in the community. So thank you.
Well said. Thank you all for being here today. Look forward to September 8th, and keep us up to date on all the latest and greatest. And thanks for some ideas and legislative things we can maybe advocate for. And we'll be talking soon. So Thank you all. Have a wonderful day. We are adjourned for this work session. Thank you for joining us.